Poetry don't live in ivory towers, wrapped in mink, wiping its ass with silk and farting Pulitzer prizes. Poetry gets down and dirty because it's got nowhere else to go. Poetry breathes, bleeds with bruised and scraped knuckles, a broken nose, and poetry won't tell you who did it because poetry knows how to take care of itself. Poetry pops pills and shoots up, slippery with mucus and vomit. With faded burn scars, hidden questions in the ER at 2 a.m., poetry is placed in foster homes, pregnant and alone. It avoids eye contact with others, writes its name on walls in spray paint, acrylic, aerosol, shit, blood, then erases it, so no one will know that poetry is ashamed of its own distorted face. Poetry mumbles to itself on street corners, urinates in hallways, puts its fist through stubborn walls. Poetry is under psychiatric evaluation to monitor its ability to understand reality. Poetry is what people cross the street to avoid. Divorced, disowned, disregarded, it lashes out. Poetry hurts the ones it loves. In a cold sweat, haunted by nightmares, poetry gets the shakes. Poetry would rather forget, swigs hard liquor, snorts dust, turns into dust. Poetry licks wounds and lines, and sometimes poetry can't even understand itself. Rope burns around its neck, poetry straps a bomb to its chest and walks into the courthouse. Liberates its comrades from behind unjust walls and doesn't look into the faces of children playing across the street before it pushes the detonator. Poetry kills, packs heat, and poetry remembers pulling the trigger. With a bandolier bracelet and dirty hands, poetry talks down suicide jumpers. Poetry has never felt loved, has felt a Marine's bullet tear through flesh, the impact of nightstick and pavement married as one. Poetry saves lives and slits its own wrists, and poetry wants to live. Poetry has tubes up its nose, morphine drip, bandaged head, pumped stomach, and doctors that say the AZT seems to be having no effect. Poetry coughs up bloody bile. The experts say, well, poetry is dying. Poetry is not dead yet. In fact, poetry thinks it will live forever, stuck between the earth and the sky. It stands in the spotlight, defies any judgment, especially its own. Poetry is learning to forgive itself. Poetry is trying to love itself, but poetry loves you more than you love your own goddamn self.